I believe we had originally scheduled, I think, everything else other than general fund. I'm trying to find the schedule. And then, but Rebecca, you asked, let me see, today we have scheduled library, senior resource center, Shorewood Today, debt service, TIDS. And you wanted to start with Mark's memo, correct?
Correct.
Okay, let's go.
Mark, do you want to run through the memo and strategies? I think that may be a good place to start, if that's acceptable to you, Trustee Amenta.
Sure.
I'd be happy to. One of the takeaways from the last meeting was a request for staff to develop some strategies to realign the budget in a manner more consistent with, I think, the majority of the village board. So as part of doing that, we have identified 4 different kind of fundamental strategies which could be discussed, from which then we would use those strategies to build the framework for the budget wrap-up discussion. Again, trying to make it a little more manageable of a discussion for budget wrap-up. Obviously, the group has a number of items that are still under the list for additional discussion. Those don't go away, but really trying to look to reset as a starting point for those discussions. We provided a follow-up message to trustees that expresses, how staff would rank those strategies from our perspective. And then we also followed up with a request to provide the board a list with an indication of how staff would propose reducing capital expenditures, and we've provided supplemental material to do that as well. So, we hope we've captured the spirit of the last meeting and your request to follow up on those items. And I guess we're open to discussion at that point for additional direction.
Why don't you go through the items 1 through 4?
Sure. Item 1 is an item that's come up in the past as a revenue diversification option, which is moving the public fire protection fees currently funded by the tax levy to the water utility. It is a widely used practice. It would be a change from how the village has done that historically. But it's certainly an option to consider, as was included in a memo that came to the board a while back. Again, on part of our global budgeting process is to present options for revenue diversification. So that's pretty much what this item does. From a strategic position, the benefit of this strategy is that it could be used to preserve the capital funding currently proposed in the budget, which would then lend itself to breaking the chain of cutting capital expenditures only to have them come back the following year, and then in some cases with more expenditures proposed as we go through each year in the process, and trying to identify the particular needs that we see for the village. It does not reduce expenditures. This is a realignment of how we address those costs, and that's pretty much the nuts and bolts of that option.
I know when we've talked about this in past years, we've discussed that it's merely moving the expense from the property tax levy to the water bill. So it's not in essence reducing cost in any way, or it reduces tax, but it doesn't reduce, it increases water cost. So it's not a net reduction in any way. And I believe there were sentiments expressed among the board of the economic, very difficult economic times that some people find themselves in, not everyone, but some people, and that the goal was not merely to move cost from one place to another, but to reduce cost. So does anyone else have any questions or comments on this?
I have
Yes.
a question.
Oh, President Rozak and then Trustee Stokerbrand.
Thank you. Oh, Howard, can you hear me?
No, not really.
I concur with Trustee Amenta with her statement and her observation of last year, what the trustees had mentioned, or board members, that we really would like some options to reduce costs to the taxpayer, whether it be utility or tax levy, not merely shift the costs. So I don't think that strategy one accomplishes that.
And Trustee Stokerbrand? Okay, Trustee Carpenter.
So a couple of questions about this shifting this cost. Because it's based on the water meter that you have. So let's say a $500,000 residential home probably has the same water meter as a $200,000 home. Would that be accurate?
Yeah.
But the big changes, so the big volume users, in my view, would it be like St. Robert's, the school district, churches? Would this affect, let's say, Ascension? Does Ascension pay property taxes for their location on Oakland Avenue? Would this make them pay by this fee, add them to, contributing to fire protection?
Well, I'd be happy just to briefly touch on that. The fee is based on meter size. That's how the PSC attributes that. So, well, a modest house on Downer Avenue probably has the same 3/4 inch meters as a house on Ardmore. The bigger properties have bigger meters, and it's when you put in the plumbing for a building, it's how many bathrooms do you have, how many faucets. They do a calculation, and then it tells you what size meter you need to put in. So the larger residence properties, the commercial properties with higher capacity, that does include tax exempt properties as well. It's all based on the meter size and the amount of capacity they have to draw on the system. So that's how those fees are calculated.
Do we currently charge, let's say, a nonprofit or the schools? How are they currently charged for fire protection?
Fire protection is a taxable tax levy item. So if you're not a taxable property, you do not contribute towards those costs directly.
Thank you.
Trustee Carpenter, did you have a question?
No, just to comment, a similar sentiment that that President Rozak and Trustee Menta were saying. I just have some real concerns, and someday, if there would be tax limits again, like there used to be, or there would not be tax limits on the or deduction limits on property taxes. I would like for our residents to be able to have that the deduction in their taxes. And have this be on the property tax bill. And I just, my overall sort of concern is that this is just shifting the problem, and same thing with, reducing capital expenditure. What we really need to be reducing is operational expenditures, because the capital expenditures are just going to, it's like kicking the can down the road. Next year, we're going to have, you know, the same things to pay for plus more. So, you know, I think we have to figure out a way to not just, you know, move things around and play Tetris. We need to figure out a way to make some changes, because we can't, I mean, that's really what it comes down to. There's really, this is going to be really tough. And cutting out all the capital expenses, I don't know that that's the answer either. So.
I agree.
Yeah,
if
and this
you
is
want-
Trustee Backhorst.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and I'd like to also just state that moving something off the tax levy and into a service fee is quite regressive. And again, we want to ensure that this is a place where we can attract a variety of people and maintain diversity and equity, and not have a flat tax and punish those the most that can least afford to pay it.
Okay. All right, I'll move on to strategy 2.
Sorry. Trustee,
Oh, I'm sorry, Trustee Warren.
yeah, I don't want to beat the dead horse here. And so I'll make this quick, but I agree with the sentiments that are expressed around, you know, I don't think that we're interested in just moving costs around. I think we want a reduction here. And it does strike me as regressive. And I also agree with what Trustee Carpenter said, that, you know, in the event that that deduction comes back, it would be nice to have our residents be able to take that deduction. So without beating the dead horse, I'll move on, but I agree with the sentiments expressed here.
Okay, it seems like we have pretty much a consensus on that one. Okay, so strategy 2.
Strategy 2 relies on, revolves around the capital project fund. There are a number of projects that are labeled by staff as priority ratings 2 and priority ratings 3. Some of those projects include funding, most of those projects are funded through tax levy, and some of them includes funding from reserves. Plus there's another $150,000 of reserves that's not budgeted for in the proposed budget. So this strategy is pretty much taking out anything but the essential, or but the highest priority rated topics, the #1 items, and then using all the capital reserves again to reduce the tax levy on the remaining items. That does produce a significant savings. Staff again did provide a supplemental list of, you know, how that would look. With the list has some strike throughs and some totals, slightly different than what the board processed last time, but substantially the same in many regards. So obviously, you know, we touched on the drawbacks of that. So that's option number 2.
Okay, I was just looking at the numbers. I mean, that would mean not having money for parking and transportation implementation, the cameras and video in the boardroom that we've been talking about for a long time. I noticed the kayak launch that we're talking about tonight's not even listed in here. So, I mean, this has some real drawbacks because it's, and the Atwater, the trash receptacles at Atwater Beach wouldn't be funded. Yeah, that would have some real disadvantages because there's some things that we'd like to see happen. Okay, strategy 3, combination of 1 and 2. Well, nobody likes 1, so.
Are we gonna go for strategy 2?
Actually, like 1, but whatever. I
Oh, we
can
do
see,
like 1?
I'm not in the majority, so.
Well, I mean, I think 2, you know, all these things that are 2 or 3 are on the list, you know. It's just whittling down our
Okay.
our capital projects or using reserve, more of reserves. I mean, that's, I don't have a problem using reserves, but
I don't have a problem with this. I just was shocked. I didn't know we had 150,000 left in capital reserves, even with everything budgeted. Is that correct, Mark?
I had a little bit of trouble hearing you, but I think you asked if we still would have 150,000 left in reserves. Is that correct?
Yeah, so everything that's budgeted in our budget packet, we still have 150 left.
That's correct.
it
So,
says ending fund balance 189,962 in 2021 for capital projects fund.
And just as a point of reference, again, the supplemental staff proposal did tweak some of the ratings on some of the items, particularly related to the DPW cameras and security system. You know, they asked us to prioritize those, so those were broken out and made it to a priority 1, whereas the Village Center, Village Hall were left as a priority 3. And staff's recommendation did not remove funding for parking and transportation or the facilities condition assessment. So again, similar in many, many regards, but we tried to take into account what we also heard at the previous meeting.
It should also be noted that the canoe and kayak launch that's going to be discussed later in the meeting tonight is actually funded through to TID 3. And so it's not reflected within the scope of this budget.
okay, so,
Okay, yeah, but I mean, if you look at capital projects fund 400 under 2021 proposed budget, it says ending fund balance 189,962. So I think President Rozek was asking about 150, but isn't it really 190? Or you're saying use 150 of the 190 and still have 40 left?
Well, basically, we're leaving that window to your discretion. Conceptually, we do have $150,000 residual from the sale to North Shore Fire Department that is not programmed in. And then we do have, you know, approximately 40,000 based on projections from 2020 that would be left over at the end of 2020 outside of the North Shore Fire property sale.
Okay.
So, you know, we will have some updates to those projections. We hope that they're reasonably estimated, but, you know, I would always advise a certain tolerance for variation within that mid-year. So
thanks for clarifying. And the only reason I asked that, I didn't realize, I am not a proponent of utilizing the North Shore Fire Department sale funds to fill gaps in this budget. I stick by my original sentiment that should have gone to the council or to our board to determine whether we wanted to utilize it for something like, you know, put it away for environmental improvements to future projects, green improvements, green infrastructure, or something else. And we haven't had that discussion yet. So I take back my sentence that I would use capital reserves to fill some holes. If it's the North Shore Fire Department sale funds, I do not want to utilize that. I prefer not to utilize those to fill our holes in this budget. If there's 40,000 of reserves in capital other than the North Shore Fire Department, I think that's pretty low. And I think we've always been advised to leave at least, I think the lowest we've ever gone is 33,000 in the capital reserves. And so if it's only at 40 after this budget, unless we find other ways to cut, I would not recommend using that as well.
Okay, but I mean, I just, that we need to keep in the back of our mind that there's some money in that reserve pot. You know, I understand that there may be other interest in using it for other things, but we're just trying to figure out, you know, where we have possible solutions here. So that, does anyone else have any questions on the capital funds reserve balance?
I do. This is Trustee Bachhorst.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm going to reiterate what President Rozek said, but maybe for a slightly different reason. I don't believe it's a good practice in government to sell off our buildings in order to fill budget gaps, especially in areas that are not in concert with the intended use. So we sold a village building to the North Shore, which we're just 1% of the membership. And I do not want to use that money then. I don't want to go down that road and start that bad practice.
Okay, any other comments? Okay. So strategy 3 is a combination of those two. So does anyone need, I think we can go on to strategy 4, which is what we did last year, where we subsidize the increase in debt service. And we sort of write that down using some fund balance. And I think last year, we normally try to keep it to a 5% increase, but last year we put extra in and kept it to a 0% increase. And it's basically a way to use fund balance to free up levy for other things. So Mark, if you wanna, Mark, do you wanna go over what your issues are with doing that?
Well, the primary issue is making sure that staff communicates the implications of, continuing to move down that trail. So based on last year's board discussions, staff interpreted those actions to mean that the board was interested in holding the debt service tax levy steady until TID 1 closes. The memo that accompanied the materials for today is extremely similar to the memo that was prepared for the village board to consider last year. We've tried to update the numbers to the best of our ability and provide additional clarification when applicable. So that is certainly a strategy that the board can engage in. We just want to make sure we laid out the implications of that very clearly in the materials provided.
I had a question. The surplus applied 290,565. Does that get us to a 0% increase or a 5% increase from last year?
That is 0%.
Okay, and from what you explained to me earlier today, assigned for next year's budget, the 468,437 is for the same purpose for 2022. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And that gets us to, is that another 0%?
That's correct.
Okay, so, all right, the reason the 468,437 confused me is I'm not sure why we would pre-fund 2 years in 1 year. I mean, we can worry about 2022 next year. We don't need to, I'm not sure why that 468,437 isn't available for capital projects, other things.
Well, the funds are currently available. That's a below the line reference for what we expect 2021 ending to be. So those funds are certainly available. If they're consumed this year, they wouldn't be available for 2022. Again, we can work through those issues depending on the will of the board. Part of my worksheets try to call out where we see 2021 ending, and based on that 0%, we see needing that money to support a 0% increase in 2022.
Can I ask a question? I apologize if I'm just looking at the packet, so I might not have the right memo or the right chart in front of me. By utilizing more of the general fund, or rather than using it for debt service, by utilizing more of it for our regular operating budget to reduce tax levy, my assumption is that we run out sooner in our general fund reserve in order to subsidize. So the years, it gets shorter, meaning we can't subsidize debt service for as many years. And I'm just wondering, does this move up by utilizing what's in the memo, strategy 4, whatever it says, 200,000, I think. Would that move the year? Meaning, would we lose a year of being able to subsidize debt service?
Well, again, I think that's a great observation because it's the same money. However, the village board decides to apply that, be it debt service reduction or to reduce the tax levy in the operations division. You know, the path that we're on now, you know, we're past the long-term view of debt service stabilization. You know, we're going to look at a reset when TID 1 closes. So we have I estimate that we have the available funds to do that until TID 1 closes. So
can you just explain what that means? I apologize. So for the last 5 years on the board, we had a chart and it would show this is how much is in the general reserve. And with it, we can utilizing our policy for debt service subsidization, because we could go all the way out to say 2026. And I know debt stabilizes at a certain point, but it wasn't until like 2028 or something. And every time we utilize that fund, it seems that we have, it's going to hit us sooner that we're going to have we're not going to be able to stabilize our debt service. And what you're saying, if I am interpreting correctly, is when TID 1 closes, we no longer have to worry about stabilizing debt?
Well, I wouldn't quite put it that way. What I'm saying is that the decision to change the metrics for debt service stabilization from a managed 5% increase each year to holding it steady at 0, we will not have sufficient funds to manage debt service stabilization predominantly other than through a reset when TID 1 closes. So when TID 1 closes, we're going to have to raise the debt service tax levy to something very close to the actual debt service needs.
So my understanding, and the reason I'm bringing this up, and I apologize to take the time, but since the first year that I became a trustee, when we run out of debt stabilization funds in our general fund, our tax levy increase is humongous. That's what I saw year after year after year. And so that's why I worry about how soon we run out, because that year, if we're not every year, if we're not cutting operations a small bit, at some point we get to a cliff. Where is that chart, and how does this $200,000 affect that?
Well, I mean, but Allison, okay, so the 2020 budget was projected to have a 5.9 million fund balance, but now we're going to have, now it's 6.4 million. So there, we started with 700,000, but every year, like now, there's obviously money that just worked. We had more revenues and expenditures. So, you know, that fund balance kitty gets big, you know, gets refilled. Not every year, but this year. So it's not like it's a fixed amount and it's going to run out. It was a fixed amount, but that now we have positive fund balance. So that raises the amount again. So
yep.
You know, that's why I'm saying I don't think we should. So Mark is essentially funding us to 0% in 2021 and in 2022, all out of the, you know, funding us that difference 2 years ahead. And I'm just saying, I don't think we need to pre-fund 2022.
That wasn't my question. Thank you. So I just want assurance that, like Trustee Menta has said, now that we have more fund balance, maybe we're not going to run out a year earlier. But I remember every other year we had this chart in long-range financial planning, and it shows the year in which we cannot subsidize debt any longer. But as Trustee Menta is saying, if all of a sudden we found more revenue to put in the general fund, then maybe there's no concern. I just want confirmation of that.
Well, I'm not sure how to best respond to that, other than there should be some significant concern about the concept that the original 5% per year increase is now gone. You know, the direction has now been to hold debt service, at least up to this meeting, at a 0% increase, which takes more and more general fund reserves to support. Now we've done pretty good the last couple of years with our budget variances, and that number always changes. But there's no longer a feasible situation at the moment where we can just kind of pick off where we left off after deferring those increases for 2 or 3 years in a row. That's what the difference with those increases closes that gap, which allows us to ultimately get to a point where we're at our appropriate level of debt service tax levy to meet our debt service needs. But we're suppressing that closure.
But if we have excess fund balance every year, then we may be able to fund it with excess fund balance, and it'll come back down, and we will be at the right levy for the debt. I mean, at this point, now you have budgeted in 2 years of fund balance to keep us at 0. So, I mean, it seems like our fund balance is doing pretty well. So, I mean, I don't understand why we should continue to tax people and continue to build a fund balance. Fund balance is taxes that we taxed in prior years. Like, I'm not in favor of taxing people and putting it in a fund over here. I'm in favor of taxing people and spending it.
And I'm all for, I agree with Trustee Menta 100%. I just, when we get to long range financial planning next year, you're going to have that chart, and it's going to show that last year we did it, we utilized general fund to get debt service subsidized at 0%, which usually we do at 5%. So I'm just wondering what that did to the year we run out of stabilizing our debt, because at some point there's a cliff, like I've been saying since year 1, and maybe that cliff went away, but that I need to know what year that cliff happens in, so that I know appropriately whether I should take more money, I should vote to take more money out. We're not cutting operating expenses we're not cutting operating expenses, as Trustee Carpenter has said. And by not doing that slowly every year, you're going to get to a cliff for debt service where we have no more money to stabilize it. And that is a huge tax levy increase in that year. I just want to know if that year has moved up based on this proposal of taking out 200,000. So I don't know if we can answer that tonight, but that's my question.
Mark, was that on that spreadsheet that you sent us?
Yes, it was. You know, effectively that runs out in 2022 then, if that's really the question.
Thank you.
Based on known facts now. And again, there is a way, if the board's will is to extend the life of the TID, you know, we can eke out another cycle on that. But
and just so the board understands, at some point we've got to address it, because 2022, 2023, depending on when we send the TID, there will come a day where our tax levy is going to increase substantially because we run out of reserves.
But how can you say it's going to run out in 2022 when you funded 2022 in this budget? Those are inconsistent statements.
I just don't know how to address that without a hands-on workshop on how those numbers flow in that spreadsheet. You know, and again, the tax year that's impacted by TID closure is 2023. So maybe that's part of the, you know, the metrics here that make it a little more challenging to understand, but
I'd like to see if other trustees have questions or if this is clear to people. I'm not any any response. Yes, trustee Carpenter.
As clear as mud to me. Yeah, I mean, I just have some concerns with us holding all this money in our general fund. And I understand what President Rozek is saying, and I mean, we've been sort of watching that date, you know, creep closer and closer. I mean, I think what really comes down to is that we need to make some operational changes. We need to make some operational expense changes, because otherwise, again, we're just sort of pushing this like same problem out year after year. So I think, you know, I'm not in favor of having this huge general fund that we're not using. But I think it needs to be sort of a combination of factors or situations, you know, some operational expenses that are cut, using some of the general fund. You know, that's where I think as that's where I'd like for us to end up. You know, I'm not so tied to the 0%, but I would like to be, you know, no more than 1.5%. In my mind, that seems reasonable in this economic situation.
And just to clarify, the 0% was for debt service. You know, it's not the overall.
Oh, okay, sorry. Yep.
And I just want to clarify one other point. Utilizing general fund to subsidize the operating budget won't get us there either. What I'm saying is, I've been on the board for 5 years and we've made no operational changes to service levels or like actual changes that would cost less. And in order to do that, the reason we're subsidizing debt with our general fund is so we have time to make those small cuts, rather than when we get to that year, whatever that year, and it's pushing forward now closer and closer as we use it, rather than having that year come and say, whoa, now we have to cut in our operational budget, you know, 10%, or taxes are going to go up 10%. You know, it was a huge increase. And so either we had the choice of making cuts to our actual service levels slowly while we're subsidizing from our general fund reserves, or we can just utilize our general fund reserves and make no cuts, and then just bam, when that date comes, it's going to be significant. And it's a really hard concept to understand. We should talk about it more in financial planning, because that's where we talk about it. And for this year, I just wanted to make sure that if any trustee voted for that 200,000, we understand that now we have less years, if it's true, you know, we have less years to make operational cuts before a huge increase, before our debt.
Well, I mean, you know, a point, we did make minor operational cuts last year, but I mean, I'll point out, you know, we talked about the general fund last time and actually approved an additional 0.3 positions, and really we're not presented with any operational cuts, nor did we ask for any. Now, you know, we could always say every department cut 5%. We could do an across the board kind of cut. I mean, there are options that are kind of crude, but there are options if people are in favor of an operational cut or some combination. So maybe there's some combination of operational cut, use of reserves, use of capital reserves, you know. Does anyone else have questions on this last strategy? And then I think we should move on to at least trying to get through library and SRC.
I do. This
yes.
is Trustee Bockhorst. So, I mean, especially for the newer trustees, it's important to understand that every year the costs go up, right? Inflation, et cetera. And the amount of money that we get from the state either stagnates or goes down. So that gap is going to grow regardless. Trustee Amenta is right. Last year we did make some operational cuts. And also we've had a couple of organizational studies of late. So, and I'm not really sure what kind of operational cuts some of my fellow trustees are leaning towards here. But the reality is, yes, we are going to have less money each year with which to deal. We've known that for a while. And I kind of appreciate what Trustee Carpenter had said, that just holding fast to a 0% increase or this or that, albeit a great goal, doesn't seem by what's presented to us very viable. So I want to, of course, keep the tax levy increase as low as possible, but let's also be realistic, everyone, that maybe what we would like to do and what is possible for an organization of our size, given that we are, high on overhead on operational side because we have a small population in those services without merging. We're looking at merging with Whitefish Bay or with Milwaukee or anything else, then we can save considerably in operational costs. But my fellow trustees are right. I haven't seen a proposal that does get us there with those kind of cuts. And again, the level of services that I've been on the board the longest of anyone here. Every year we do a survey, every couple of years. Not once has there been a majority of people, even close to it, who wanted to see service levels decrease in this village, if not the opposite. So we have to balance that as elected officials. How are we going to fund the things that people want to see? And if what we're presenting to them is service level cuts so that we can ideologically, maintain a certain kind of tax increase, then sell us. Great. I'd love to hear it.
Are there any other comments before we move on to Library Senior Resource Center, Shorewood today?
Well, I would just like to wrap up then by saying, again, absent any additional guidance, we will just proceed with the list that was discussed at the last meeting and try to work through that process.
Well, you mentioned that there were things that would take you some time to prepare. Is that in regards to the hydrant fee, but not in regards to use of reserves? Am I correct in saying that?
That's correct.
Okay, so if we do decide to use some reserves to get through this year, okay.
Trustee Amenta?
Yeah.
Rebecca here. Wanted to let you know that I wasn't sure what time was going to be available for the rest of the meeting. So the library will not be on the call tonight. They're going to be scheduled to come back on October 5th. So we can proceed with the rest of the line items, coming back to them at a later date.
October 5th is, we don't have a budget and finance meeting scheduled that date.
It's our next regularly scheduled board meeting that we would schedule a budget and finance to conclude any other business.
Did you reschedule anybody else?
No. It was just in the interest of time. People were concerned about not being able to get through it, and they didn't want to keep as many people on the call if we weren't going to be able to get to that item.
Okay, then what are we doing then?
You're welcome to move forward to another item. I see that we have SRC on the call, if you'd like to move to them.
Okay, let's go to Senior Resource Center. Does anybody have any questions on their budget? Okay, nothing? Oh wait, I'm not even on the right page. I guess I had a question about projections of participant fees. Oh, 2021, the budget for 2020 was budgeted at 30,000 and 2021, 7,500. So, but then another 20,000 in Benjamin Fund contributions. So the Benjamin Fund is kind of making up for the drop in
Correct.
fees. Okay.
Trustee Menta?
Yes, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That's great. Can I just ask, I haven't asked this in the past, and I'm just wondering if maybe it might be helpful for myself and for some of the newer trustees, maybe just a quick, like, high level, how does the Benjamin Fund work? And what does it cover?
I can help you with that. I think Mark last year rearranged our budget so that the page that shows the senior programming fees, that page includes all the items that the Benjamin Fund covers.
That's page 91.
Thank you, Mark.
Looks like everything except salaries. Is that?
Salary and overhead, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
The Benjamin Fund does not allow for us to utilize any of the funds for purposes of staff. So programming costs, things that are in addition to that, or physical modifications to the building. But staff is not something that it's accommodated in that cost or that applicable expenditure.
Is the Benjamin Fund self-sustaining, or are we spending it down?
It is more than more than self-sustaining. It is growing and it continues to grow.
So the funds are invested, and traditionally we have not spent down the amount that could be allocated each year or spent on programming dollars, just because we have, constraints with how much we can deploy given the staff resources that we have to do so. So it's been, to Elizabeth's point, self-sustaining and intends to be in the future with the same type of operations.
Okay, great. Any other questions on the Resource Center? Or? Okay. Oh, you do, President Rosa.
So the CBDG funds that we talked about, Mark, I know you were going to do some research, or maybe Bart was, I can't remember, but at ICC, they mentioned that it could be utilized for the Senior Resource Center, and has been at some point in the past, the county fund that we're a conglomerate with. Can that be used for staff? Because what I think I'm hearing from our director is that without additional staff, which we have not really granted since I've been on the board, the Benjamin Fund for programming is going to keep growing, which is it's sad because we're going to have all these programming dollars, but not a way to utilize them because we don't have tax levy to support staff increases, or that we've been willing to utilize to support staff increases. And I think as our senior population grows, I would be willing to increase staff in the Senior Resource Center using tax levy if needed, but I'm just wondering if the CBDG fund would fund salaries if we were to apply for it.
Bart, do you have a comment on that, or want me to take it?
Go ahead, Mark. I don't have a direct answer for that.
My understanding from the last time we were participating in that program is that those are general funds, so long as the overall program serves the applicable clientele for the grant. The challenge is that the amount of funds that are available to the village are typically limited to very modest amounts, $8,000, $10,000 per year. But they also come with significant documentation requirements of program staff to accept the funding. So
my understanding was they were competitive. Could someone make a phone call to them? I don't know why we'd be limited to 8,000.
Well, that's outside of my current knowledge, but we can certainly follow up with you on that
Okay.
At the next meeting.
Okay, thanks so much.
And
My understanding, I'm sorry, excuse me, but every year the CDBG funds went down because it's sort of a competition among organizations that apply for the funds. And so it varies every year how much is available. And some years it could be, there could be extra funds available, but the trend was getting that there were fewer and fewer funds available. And given that we do not have staff available, it was an administrative hardship given that we didn't have the staff to provide the documentation that they required for the funding.
Two other options to consider. When deploying programming for the Senior Resource Center, it does not necessarily need to be done by staff that we employ. We can contract to have programming done. We can also partner with other organizations who would have a greater bandwidth in order to accomplish some of that programming need. So 2 thoughts to consider.
Trustee
Oh,
Amenta, I had a question.
Go ahead.
With the East Side Senior Services expanding to Shorewood, do we see any budget impact from that?
The Elder Services Advisory Board will now be supporting that through the Benjamin Fund, and it is reflected on this budget under programming support on page 91, and 2,500 will be going to the East Side Senior Services and 2,500 to the ERIS Senior Network, which both are supporting vulnerable older adults in our community.
Thank you.
Any other questions on Senior Resource Center? Okay, let's move on to Shorewood today. I see that last year we did not budget anything. I know they came mid-year and had advertising deficits, and I believe everyone was asked to budget 2,000. Is that correct? Mid-year.
I can take this. So for 2019, everyone was, the partners all contributed, or sorry, for 2020, all partners were at 3,000 except the village was at 2,000. Based on some initial revenues in the early parts of 2020, yeah, we had the board as well as all the other partners approve $1,000 addition onto their charges. So at the 2020 projected should actually show $3,000 and not 2,000 as far as the village contribution.
Let me see. Charges for services. The adopted budget shows 0, which.
So what Mark did for the budget was, instead of showing it on property tax line, if you go down, you'll see.
Oh, I see. It's on property taxes.
4,000.
Okay, so it shows property taxes 2,000 and nothing in charges for services, and it says projected 2,000. So now it's been. So we were at 2,000, and then the projected should be 3,000, right?
Correct.
And now the request is for 4,000.
That is correct.
Well, I'd like to put that on the list. I don't know, does anybody else have any comments?
I do. I don't understand, and maybe I see that Ms. Wheeler, hi Paula, is anybody else, or Michelle, anyone that represents Shorewood today could explain. I understand advertising fees went projected from 2019, actuals were 73,500, and we're projected to have 67,800 this year. I don't, and then again, so I don't understand why our advertising fees are going down, why our advertising collection is going down.
they're going down because the projections were too high. They were not being met. It was too optimistic to attain. So
I'm looking at actuals. So the actuals for the last 2 years were 73,325 in 18, 73,530 in 19, and then in 2020 it looks like we're projected at 67.8.
Michelle, that's because she's asking why this year, why our projected revenue is 6,000 fewer than previous years.
For advertising.
because the goals were not being met. So we asked the stakeholders to increase their contribution because the advertising goal was too ambitious.
I missed the first part of that answer. I do believe the board was told that many advertisers wanted to migrate to a digital, spending their dollars on digital advertising and not print advertising. But
I don't think that's correct.
That was what we were told.
Some advertisers anecdotally told Tyler that the advertisers that I talked with were experiencing rate fatigue because in the past, the rates would go up once every 3 years, and then we were asked to shift to a different model where the rates were going up every single year. So the advertisers started to not be as interested because the value wasn't as good as it used to be.
So because the rates went up, they decided to cut their total spending because rates went up.
But the rates, I'm so confused for 1 second. I'm going to go back to my original question. After I make this statement, last year we were provided with information that with the rates of surrounding areas, and Whitefish Bay was significantly higher than what we were charging, and that was one of the reasons that the board made the decision to hire. I don't even know, last year did we hire the advertising fee rate?
Every year we've been increasing it by 5 to 8%. And yes, it goes up every year.
Okay, and I do stand by my word that the comparison that was shown to me, at least, and to the board that I saw, showed we were still significantly under our surrounding communities. However, that wasn't the original question. The question is, 2018, our advertising fees were at 73,325 that we collected. In 19, we collected 73,530. In 2020, we're projected to only collect 67,800. Is that due to, there's many reasons that could be. Maybe we cut the amount of pages that we have in our booklet, or how many editions that we put out this year. Did any of those occur, or what would the increase be from?
Well, we're still having 4 issues. We're not cutting the pages. We did experience a worldwide pandemic, which negatively impacted the advertising beginning in the summer issue. And our fall issue is actually more robust than we expected, but there's a lot of unknown around the pandemic, but that did have an impact.
Okay, that helps. I would like to put it on the list because what we are proposing in our budget is less than what the actuals were for the last 2 years for advertising. Thank you.
The budget for 2021 is more.
It's less than the actuals for 18 and 19 for the line called advertising fees. Thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions? Yes, Trustee Carpenter.
This is maybe a little bit more of a question for Tyler, but in our our village mailings, and is there any opportunity for us to shift some of our dollars? I know we had talked about this, Michelle, including some more like informational, very sort of factual information about the village and what's happening within village government, so we can potentially shift some of those dollars that we would use to send out postcards or anything like that to pay for Shorewood Today.
Well, the Shorewood Today always, and Paul is on the call too, but we do always have a whole section for the village that communicates a lot of that important information that you want everybody and all the residents and businesses to receive. The thing like we did for the insert with the voting insert, which was really a great way to reach the whole community. It did cost extra for printing and mailing, and we didn't charge you extra. So are you saying like if you do something like that again, that you could cover that cost?
I'm saying like if we could have some, it doesn't need to be obviously as robust as that voting section, but if there could be some sort of dedicated space that is really very factual and very, you know, talking about like budgeting or, you know, whatever it may be with that's relevant in that issue. There is some money set aside, correct, Tyler? I can't remember.
But Trustee Carpenter, answer your question. The answer is yes. So yeah, in the village manager's budget, we have the mass mailing line item that covers 3 mass mailings. If you wanted to have a communication strategy where you rely more on the Shorewood Today and you want to lower that to 2 mass mailings instead of 3, you could do that and lower that number.
So in my mind, like that's the reason why I would like to have it on the list, is to talk about how we can sort of reallocate those funds and reduce, you know, maybe we do reduce it to 2 mailings, so then we can put that money to pay for Shorewood Today.
If Paula could jump on, I'm pretty sure that we have regular content that's factual and important that we do set aside for you already. So that wouldn't be a change, and that would be fully prepared to continue to do.
Great. So I would like to speak also. This is Trustee Bockhorst and Ms. Boehm, I think you're misunderstanding.
Trustee Ursink had his hand up. So
okay. I'll speak after him then. Thanks.
I just want to say that I view Shorewood Today as a really fantastic asset for our community, a way that we can get reach everybody in the community. I think everybody that I've talked to, hands down, loves and supports this magazine. To cut anything from this magazine would be tragic, especially coming through a pandemic. I personally run a magazine, and I haven't been able to get my magazine off the ground since the pandemic. So I've lost pretty much 90% of my advertisers, and I've got to give Michelle a ton of credit, all the credit in the world, because she was able to bring people into the magazine and get this magazine out for our community. And I just want to say, you know, you did a lot of work, you did a lot of hard work, and we appreciate it. So thank you so much for what you guys have all done. This last issue was fantastic. It brought up a lot of really great, important topics. And I've seen people in Whitefish Bay posting on Facebook saying, why don't we have something like this? You know, so we have a very, very valuable asset in this community. Let's figure out a way to keep funding it. Okay, let's not figure out where the advertising dollars. Let's figure out how to make this thing happen and how to make it work, because it's effective.
I do want to point out that when we did bid this out, there was a vendor who was willing to do it for no subsidy at all. Trustee Bockhorst.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to, yes, thank you for mentioning that, Trustee Ursink, because even in the Third Ward Historic Association and the bid down in the Third Ward, they're looking at our magazine as the gold standard, which, yeah, and I completely agree with you. And then Ms. Boehm, I guess one of the things that Trustee Carpenter was saying, which we had in our last, I don't know, remember if it was last meeting or when it was, but it was a very robust discussion, which I'm glad that we're speaking about it tonight, is that we do have money set aside in the budget to do mailings village-wide, and there was a discussion around taxes and when the tax bill goes out and utilizing that as a method to disseminate information. However, not everyone gets a tax bill. 54% of Shorewood rents, right? So they would miss out on opportunities. So what we had discussed was precisely what Trustee Carpenter had mentioned, was look at moving some of the money we allocate from village mailings, not to take away from you guys, but then to perhaps shift it to ensure and make this the one-stop shop. And there are times, of course, where something has to go out, in a lot quicker turnaround time. And in the absence of producing another magazine, which would be not cost effective and probably nearly impossible, we would like to look at using this more as that avenue. So I don't think anyone, and forgive me, I'm not, if you're assuming or not assuming this, also forgive me, but I don't think anyone's looking, that I'm understanding, to say that you guys are not giving great factual information. Quite the contrary. So we would like to, again, increase that. So Trustee Carpenter, thanks for bringing that up so much. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, that all makes sense. I mean,
Do any other board members have questions?
I did. I
Trustee
think
Stokebrand?
the concern that I have when I look at Shorewood today is that it is more of a coffee table piece. And I think that the concern that Trustee Carpenter mentioned is one that I have also, is that very seldom do you see how much something costs and who's paying for it. And that's the kind of information, I'm sure everything in there currently is factual. It's just that there's not enough specifics about how much things cost in the village and who's paying for it. And that's the content that we need to see from Shorewood today. I enjoy the product too, but it needs to have more detail about the costs in the village, because the village is an expensive place to live and people want to know where their taxpayer dollar is going. And so it's basically just another way to increase transparency and accountability.
I thank you for the compliment that you say we're a coffee table book, because we do take great pride in the magazine and making it look good, and it's put together by professionals. So take that as a compliment. It really is. There are a lot of economies of scale by all of the stakeholders, including the village, putting in their money to create the magazine that none of them could do on their own.
Are there any other comments from trustees? Trustee Warren?
Thank you. I'll be brief. I kind of been looking at this in the scope of the bigger budget, and even with the challenges that we're going to experience this year, and there's going to be some tough decisions to be made. I look at Shorewood today, and I see it as a very valuable resource that increases transparency, that provides information that a lot of our residents rely on. So bottom line, I'm fine with keeping it at 4. I would not put it on the list. All that said, I understand that it's likely to end up on the list, but I do support it budgeted at 4.
President Rozek? You have to unmute.
Thank you. I want to say every year, I 100% support Shorewood Today. I think it is a fabulous, it's always been a very well done magazine. And I think I agree with Trustee Carpenter, and I want to just put it out on the table. I would definitely shift the funds from the village manager's line item into Shorewood Today if there was additional content provided on substantial tax information, meaning we talked about it a little bit before, and if you need to see that all of our budget meetings are taped, so maybe the last budget meeting, if you want to just rewind and look at that conversation. It's not just shifting the line to supplement it, because I do think our mass mailings are very important that are in the manager's memo or in the manager's budget. But if that information that would go out anyways was done in Shorewood Today, the shifting would be a potentially good thing to do. So with that said, I also, the second and last thing I want to talk about is just the advertising fees. One of the things I mentioned last year, and why I'm looking at the line, and I do understand the pandemic, and I appreciate that explanation, and I totally understand it. But I do look at that line because other places and other villages and our surrounding communities go after downtown Milwaukee Ballet. They go after some of those bigger funders for advertising that are outside of their communities, and I've yet to see that here. In our magazine, and that effort is a big effort, but I think that that's where the big advertising dollars come in, and that's why their fees are higher. They're able to attract those larger advertisers from outside of their communities. And so I look at that line to see if we are trying to go after that money as well. And that's all I needed to say. Thank you.
I would like to add that I do not support taking money for public information that the village puts out and shifting it to Shore Today. I mean, I pay a lot of attention to this magazine. I read it very carefully. And I have to say, I know many people who don't see it as all that valuable and put it right into the recycling. Secondly, I think our news gets lost in it. There's so many other articles and so many other things in here that the few pages dedicated to the village, I think, just get lost. There's probably 5 times as much information about the business district as there is about the village in here. And, you know, my concern is the same as my concern has been every year. I see the same names. I see the same people. I see the same name. There's certain people who are in almost every issue. There's this certain people, and I won't name them publicly here, although Trustee Ursink is one of them, who are in every single issue of the magazine.
Oh, I used to be in a lot.
I do a lot of
So
my
here
community.
we
I
have,
do a
here
lot
we
of
have
my
him
community.
right on the cover. But
Hey, I do
anyway,
a
That's
lot-
a
I
dapper
volunteer for
photo, though. I do like that.
spend my free time
my point is that if
ridiculous.
you are going to be a magazine for the entire village, be a magazine for the entire village. It doesn't have to be just a handful of people who are featured and represented in every single issue. I don't support any public funding for Shore Today, and I certainly
I
don't.
know that.
You don't need to interrupt
I'd
me,
like to
Trustee
just-
Bockhorst.
You have the
I let you
soapbox
have your
every
turn to
year on
talk.
this.
You can let me have my
Okay.
turn to talk.
Okay,
It's
I'll raise my hand.
7:14.
Okay, I would like to finish my comments. So I certainly don't support money that we communicate directly with residents on issues of importance, as Trustee Stokebrand pointed out. I certainly don't support shifting that money to a coffee table book. Okay,
I'd like to point out that we do a content analysis of each issue, and the village always has the majority of the content compared to the other stakeholders. So I'm sorry it doesn't seem like that, but the village does have most of the content in every issue. And we always strive for balance, but understanding that the village has a lot to talk about, a lot of good news to share with the community.
well, you know what, I'll communicate to you the names of the 3 or 4 people who appear in every single
Trustee,
issue.
I'd like to speak as well, please.
Mr. Tyler Burkhardt has something to say.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah, there's a few things I'd like to clarify. First, I know when we were talking about the general fund, it came up with Jennifer Anderson moving her services to this fund, and I just want to explain why we don't do that. If you remember, you as the village board, we are the financial agent. So this isn't just a village budget. This is for all the partners that are part of the magazine. When it comes to writing the articles, all the partners budget those expenses outside of this fund. So like the school district, they have one of their staff people, Caitlin Watson, who takes part of her time to write the articles. You'll notice in this budget, we don't have any personnel expenses for Caitlin Watson to write those articles. It's same for the bid. Jennifer Anderson does the writing for the bid articles. The bid, if you look in their budget, they have a separate line item for Jennifer to write those articles. So that is why Jennifer has a separate line item in the manager's budget and not here. And we don't want to get those confused, okay? About village content, I would agree with Michelle on the fact that there is quite a bit of village content that we get. Some of the board members, I don't know if you know the process that we do in order to do the content. As the staff liaison with the Shorewood Today, I sit down with Paula and Jennifer and Rebecca to develop the content for the village. And a lot of times I'll get ideas from department heads. There's a lot of board members that will send me articles.
Where the hell was that?
Articles.
In your computer?
Trustee Beckhurst, do you mind muting yourself?
Oh, sorry.
Thanks. A lot of board members also send me, whether it's a featured or an article, that I think I take great pride in trying to be open to that feedback and incorporating that in the magazine too. So I just want to let you know, if you are unhappy with the content, I am always happy to sit down and discuss with you article ideas. That is always on the table. I've always had that discussion. So just know that there's an open door to have that. The last thing I just want to clarify is on the revenues. Michelle, she actually showed more optimistic revenues initially to the marketing leadership committee that was not going to require as much charges for service. I probably will admit I was probably the one to push back on that more. And the reason for that is because we're using, if you look at the 2020 projected, we're using over $6,000 of our fund balance to just balance the budget for Shorewood Today in 2020. So heading into this year, we had over $16,000 for the fund balance, and we're going to be using over $6,000 of that. So that's how hard COVID and the advertising dollars have hit Michelle and her team this year. I think it's important, whatever we do, and if you want to modify things and have it on that list, that's fine. I'm more than happy to have that conversation. But I would ask is that we do something very conservative, because I don't want to keep depleting that fund balance and get in a really difficult position later on. As you'll see, even though we are projecting, an increase in advertising fees to $72,500, that's a roughly about $5,000 higher projection that we're seeing. And if in 2021, I don't know how much better, businesses are going to be. And that's something that the Marketing Leadership Committee talked a great deal of. So I just want to be really sensitive to that and make sure whatever we have as a balanced budget, we do. The last thing I just want to remind you, whatever you decide to finalize as the charges for service for the village, I don't know what the other partners are going to do. So if you recommend to lower that, I don't know, if the other partners are willing to take that on. I don't know. Shorewood Foundation, we just got on last year to help balance the budget. I don't know what their appetite is to take on more, so they could drop out of the magazine, and now we're left with another $4,000 hole. So there's a lot of things at play here that I want to be really sensitive about, especially knowing that our fifth partner, Shorewood Foundation, is brand new to this magazine. So those are just a few things that I just wanted to present.
Thank you. President
Yep,
Rosick, did you have a comment?
Yeah, thank you for the follow-up. I don't agree with you, Tyler. And the reason I say that is, I've said it every year, the actuals do not show that you are correct. This year, I like the explanation, and I appreciate the explanation from Michelle that there was COVID, and that is why our revenue may have declined for advertising, because some of the small businesses have been hit hard, and I feel that. But again, we are striving to. We've always said for the last 5 years, the majority of the board, we're striving to make this self-sufficient magazine. It may never get there, but that is a goal. And in order to do that with no tax dollars, you would need to either hire your advertising fee to be in the range of what our surrounding communities are, or go after some bigger advertisers that are outside of our community, that aren't going away like the small businesses. And I know that takes more effort, and it may make a fee go up for the consultant. I don't know. But that has been, for me, and I know for Trustee Amenta at least, for 5 years straight, the self-sufficiency without tax supplementation. If for any reason advertisers are going to the digital form, then maybe we need to start thinking of going to the digital format. But again, I am looking at that line, and our proposed budget for 2021 for advertising fees is less than the actuals that we collected in 2018 and 19. I don't want to go down by any means. I would not project to go down. Do something about it. But other places are able to be self-sufficient, and at some point I'd like to see that we are too. And so rather than going in the wrong direction, I think we need to find solutions to go in the right direction, which is to either increase our advertising fees or to reach out to advertisers outside of our own community. Thank you.
Or as we were talking about our own budget, reducing costs. I just want to, I'm curious. I subscribe to 2 magazines that I get, paper magazines in my house. I'm just curious. I suspect especially some of the younger trustees. I mean, does anybody else actually subscribe to any magazines?
I'm still waiting to talk to.
Nobody?
No, I do. I do.
I think
New Yorker. Oh, I'm sorry. You go. Well,
So,
I was in
three,
line to
three
speak.
out of the 7 of us actually still subscribe to magazines. Okay, Trustee Bachorst.
Thank you. So every year we have this discussion, and every year we all make up our own facts about what's important to the board and what's important to the community regarding the Shorewood Today. And we spent a lot of time discussing this, which I think is great because the feedback I've received from this and the feedback we've gotten from what are they called, surveys and other things, is that, and also the rhetoric that this board kicks around regarding transparency and information and how we're getting stuff out to the community. I would hate to see us to look towards saying, well, you know what, and what I've also heard, and it hasn't been mentioned, is that yes, we have been raising the rates for advertisement. And this last year, pre-pandemic, some of the advertisers dropped out because they said, nope, you do this all the time. And I know that 2 trustees at least, their goal is to have this self-sufficient. But again, unless we want to go really generic on this, we got to look at what our options are as far as that's concerned. And I wouldn't say that's the will of the board, the last 5 years, whatever. I've seen this magazine in the last 7 years transform considerably. I'm very proud of this magazine. And I would invite any of the trustees here who haven't already done so, build a relationship with the editorial board, build a relationship with the leadership committee, attend the meetings, figure out what's going on. We talk about it in budget, but I don't see that happening in real time in those environments where it's possible. And we're talking about a smaller budget item overall here. Right now, we're going to be wiggling around about $4,000, probably spending about 45 minutes to get back to probably the same spot. And if anyone wants to go out and look for those big advertisers like Milwaukee Ballet, which by the way is probably is on the verge of closing, just like just about every other nonprofit entertainment organization that's really suffering significantly during the pandemic, and even the private institutions, etc. So again, great job. We can all again argue back and forth, you know, the validity of the show today. Sorry, Trustee Warren, I know you have something to say as well, but we want a place to get information out to our population. You know, criticizing or calling it a coffee table book, again, I'll take that as a compliment. It's a professional magazine. However, it's a substantive content. And if I think a lot of you remember some of the real recent articles and covers and equity and other things that are long overdue in this, not only this municipality, but worldwide. I think we're leaders, thought leaders in a variety of aspects. And I don't want to dumb us down because of old political fights and other kind of things. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
We only have 5 minutes left. You know, we never did finish capital, and we still have TIDS and debt service, the debt budget. I don't know that there's that much to discuss in those budgets, so I'll leave it up if people still have comments on Shorewood Today or if we should move on. I'm asking trustees.
One more comment, Trustee Amenta.
Yes, go ahead.
I guess, you know, to some of the other points, I would like to know, has Shorewood Today come up with a possible plan that includes rethinking, like doing an online piece, moving to a less shiny, glossy product, reducing the professional fees? Has Shorewood Today come up with an alternate plan?
And to that,
continue the status quo.
And reach seniors at the same time who aren't online.
That's not her question.
Well, we have looked at alternative plans. Some people do prefer digital, but this is the only way that we're able to reach every person, every resident in the village, every business in the village. And all of the surveys and the feedback we've got is that people really like it. If people get on a junk mail list, they don't get the magazine and they contact us and say, how can I get the magazine? So I think it is, it's popular with majority of the village. And I did want to say that we do reach out to advertisers outside of the village. They pay a little bit more, but we do reach out to them, and we do have advertisers. But the way the magazine was created is a collaboration for the stakeholders to communicate. It's a marketing communication tool for the village. So it's really supposed to be helping the small businesses within Shorewood mostly. And then, of course, we want to get support from outside where we can. But if we're not serving the stakeholders, then there's a problem.
Just think, want to end on a quick note. I've sat in a lot of those meetings and they've gone extensively through every different option, less pages, less different quality paper, all online. And, you know, I think it, you know, in my opinion, a lot of people's opinion, all the stakeholders' opinions, except for the village, sounds like that would just be a complete loss for our village. And plus, just one suggestion for Shorewood Today, please put Trustee Amenta on the cover of the next issue. I think you guys will go a lot farther.
That is one thing that will never happen. I think we can guarantee that that would never, ever happen, no matter what I do or don't do. Okay, let's move on to what is next? Debt?
It's actually, it's 7:29.
Oh, well, we're done. Okay, we have not finished all the way through the budget. I guess we'll see everyone at wrap up. Oh no, October 5th, we're talking about library. We still haven't talked about we haven't finished capital, debt, or TIDS.
So we'll be happy to list those at that meeting as well.
What will we get, like a whole 25 minutes? I mean,
we can schedule the full time if you'd like.
Can we do another
you
meeting?
know what? I mean, no one has asked me, no one's consulted with me at all about scheduling for budget this year. So
Trustee Menta, can I make a
Yes.
suggestion?
Sure.
I haven't been consulted as well. Question is, I don't know how far we are, but I know that budget, we didn't talk about priorities, the worksheet. I didn't fill out a worksheet that we talked about, that we were going to be sent out. Maybe it got sent out and I missed it. I apologize for that. But I do think we're going to need another meeting. I agree with you.
I don't want another meeting, but I agree we need it.
Yep. And I think budget wrap up is, I've always said this budgeting is way too fast for our village. We talk about a lot of things during budget because we don't during the mid-year, and 3 or 4 sessions is not enough. And so I hate to propose this, but I do think we need a special meeting. And at that meeting, I think we should be, before budget wrap up, we should be bringing our worksheets and really getting down to prioritizing among ourselves some of the cuts, because everything's on the list. And I fear that we get to the end, and this year it sounds like the majority of the board is not in favor of switching and playing Tetris or whatever Trustee Carpenter had mentioned, where you just shift things around, but the costs still go up to the taxpayer. We are serious that we want the costs to go down this year during this pandemic, and I don't think we're going to get there unless we have a special meeting.
So you're saying a meeting in addition to, I guess it would be an hour and a half on October 5th?
It could be after October 5th, but before budget wrap up.
Well, that's only 10 days between those two. What's the will of the rest of the board? Do we need a special meeting, or we could have, I guess, up to an hour and a half on October 5th, and then we have on the 15th, as long as it takes us. I mean, I'll point out, we don't really have any operational cuts to talk about. I mean, other than if we were just to do across the board cut, we don't have anything to talk about. So I think the options for getting us down to a 1.5% or 1%, that's what we've talked about tonight.
I think there are some operational, I'm not sure that that's exactly factual. The administration should actually bring an operational cut to us so we can consider it for once. And I also think that there are positions that are operational that have made the list, and the vacancy factor. And so
did we have positions? I don't recall that.
Are you guys having a conversation back and forth? Because you can do this
I think
offline.
it's forestry. I think forestry was put on the list, and there might have been something else in DPW. But anyhow, I do think as Trustee Carpenter had mentioned, we may want to consider an operational cut this year. And so I think the administration.
Well, let's just talk about timing. Do we need, if we have an hour and a half on the 5th, do we need another special meeting? I don't think we do. What do other people think?
I think that people should ask their questions offline when they can and come to the budget meeting. And I understand there's new people and I understand there are a lot of questions and I
Trustee
appreciate
Bachhorst,
those.
you're not the chair.
That's okay. Go ahead, finish what you were saying. Trustee
So
Bach.
I would not advocate, it's true, we don't get through our board business during our regular meetings and this meeting is going long. No way, we just gotta be more efficient. So I don't think we need a special meeting. I think those who have questions, who are newer to the budgetary process, can ask those questions of the necessary staff people, and a lot of this time would be freed up.
Okay, that's a no. Anybody, Trustee Carpenter?
I sort of think we should get through the October 5th meeting and let's see where we are. And then between October 5th and October 15th, if we, or at the end of that October 5th meeting, if we feel like we need more time before the 15th, then we have 10 days to make that happen.
That sounds reasonable. Is anybody, Trustee Warren?
I'll second that. I think
Okay.
that's a good plan.
That sounds, okay, so we won't plan right now for an extra meeting and we'll try to get through as much as we can on the 5th. Okey doke.
So then we'll meet at 6 o'clock on the 5th.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay, anyone want to move to adjourn?
I'll move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Hi.
Any opposed? All righty, we are adjourned.